What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to the Simulator series. In today's episode, we are going to be creating the stats and rewards module handler for our simulator. As always, if you guys do enjoy the video or it does help you out, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn this post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, I do have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I make during this episode. There's a link down below in the description. You guys go check that out. With that being said, let's get into it. So, you're probably thinking, why do we want or why do we need to make these modules? Let's first go over the rewards module. There's countless methods that a player can earn rewards in most of the games. If we think about it, they have the main objective, which in this game, it's clicking. Every time you click, you will get rewarded with a specific currency. Usually, you also get rewards for daily logins, completing quests, achievements, or jobs. You can also usually purchase the main currency, and then also entering in codes from Twitter or groups and things like that. Considering how many ways we can reward a player, we should create a few specific functions which we'll use anytime we want to reward the player. We'll simply provide the function the player and the amount to be rewarded, while the function will handle all of the other details like multiplier, stats, and things like that. Now let's think about why we want to have a module for the stats. There are also countless ways a player can have increased stats in most games, such as their level, the equipped item that they have, the pets they have equipped, a friends bonus, boosters, or even purchases from the store as well. So considering how many different systems can affect each stat of the player, we should centralize this. Then whenever we need the value of the player's specific stat, we can call a function and simply provide the player. The function will do all of the other work of calculating the player's stats, and then we can use that stat however we want. So let's actually create the modules. Within the server script service, let's go ahead and create a new folder, and we're going to rename this to Utils. If you're unfamiliar with what utilities are, here's an example from one of my actual projects that I've been working on for a while. Now inside of this module script, I have a function named format number, and whenever I call this function, all I do is I pass through a number, which can be either a number or a string, and then this function will handle the back end work, so it'll check if it's a string, then it'll convert it to a number, and then it'll call another function on it from a library, and then it'll return that number. So pretty much a utility module script contains different functions that you'll be using throughout your entire code base. Rather than having this format number function in 5 different scripts, I put the function directly into one module script, which I call from every single script that I want to use this function in, and it keeps our code clean, and it allows us to centralize this one function, so if there's ever a bug with it, we can easily find it and fix it and stuff like that. So with that being said, hopefully I helped you guys understand utility scripts. Now we're going to go ahead and add in a brand new module script inside of our utils folder, and we're going to rename this to stats. And then also for the module, you don't have to change this name, but I'm going to change it to stats. So there we go. And then I'm going to duplicate this script, and we're going to rename this to rewards, and then we're going to change stats to rewards, and there we go. Let's first work on creating the stats module script. Let's think about all the stats that we currently have in our game. We have the food stat, which increases the amount of food that you gain every single time you click. We have the max food, which increases the total amount of food that you can hold. We have the coin stat, which increases the amount of money you get from selling food. And then we also have a general multiplier, which you obtain from ranks, and that increases your damage, HP, food, and speed multiplier. So currently we have about 4 different stats, and now let's talk about all the different systems or ways that those stats are individually affected. So the food stat is affected by the items that the player has equipped, the pets that they have equipped, the ranks that they have equipped, if they've purchased a specific item for Robux from the store, and also the booster system as well. The max food stat is affected again by the items that the player has equipped, and if they've purchased anything from the store as well. The coin stat is affected by the pets that they have equipped, if they've purchased a specific thing from the store, and the boost system. And then the multiplier system that we were talking about with ranks is affected only by the rank that the player has equipped. Now the reason that I wanted to go over all this is because we want to map out every single stat that we want to make a function for, and we also want to map out every single thing that actually affects these stats. And the reason for that is because when we're making our functions, we want to make sure that we didn't forget about a system, and we didn't forget about anything when calculating the stats themselves. So since we now mapped out all of the stats and what they're affected by, let's go ahead and create a function for one of the stats. The first stat that we're going to start working on is the food stat. So let's go ahead and create a function for that, and the only argument that it's going to accept is a player. Now we're going to be working with the general config files that we've been using this entire time inside of the replicated storage. So let's go ahead and get all of those config files. Considering how many times we've already gotten those files, you can copy it directly from the player data script or many of the other scripts that we've already done the same thing on. Now, above the food function, we actually want to create a local function called get item stat, and that's going to accept the name of the item, and it'll also accept the type of the item that we're going to look for as well, and both of these are going to be strings. Now, the reason that we're creating the get item stat function is because the food stat is affected by the item the player currently has equipped, so is the max food stat, and the multiplier as well, because that's affected by ranks. So what the get item stat function is going to do is we're going to pass this function the item that the player currently has equipped, as well as the type of the item that we're looking for, and then we're going to loop through one of the configs. So let's say, for instance, the tool config, we're going to pass through the tool that the player has equipped, then we're going to pass through tool so that we can know that this is the config we want to loop through. We're going to loop through that config, and then we're going to look for the ID, which would be the name that we're passing through here, and then once we find that specific tool with the same ID, we're then going to return the stat that the item offers. So as usual, I feel like we've done this plenty of times now. We're going to create a new variable inside of here called list, and we are going to say if type equals food, then tool config, else if type equals rank, then rank config, else DNA config, and that's how we're going to get our list. Then we will loop through there. So for underscore, because we're not going to use the index, config line in I pairs list do, and then we're going to say if config line dot ID is the same as name, then we want to return the config line dot stat, and that's how we're going to get the item stat. So now back inside of the food function, we want to create a new variable called total, and this variable is going to be used to perform the math on all of the different things which actually affect the stat. So at the end of the script, we just want to return the total, because total will be the sum of all the systems which actually affect this specific stat. Let's make another variable inside of the food function called item, and we're going to set that to the get item stat, and we're going to provide the player dot inventory dot equipped rank dot value. Now, if you're unsure as to why we're providing this, we can start up our game and we can go into the players. We'll look inside of my player. So think of it this way: player dot inventory, and then inside of the inventory we have the equipped DNA, the equipped rank, or the equipped tool, and then the value would be French fry 3, for example. So that's why we're using that directory. We set this system up a couple of episodes back, and that's how our data system is set up. But of course, if you have a different data system than how we've set up here, you'll obviously have to alter this to fit your own system. So actually, we're not going to provide it the equipped rank, we're going to provide it the equipped tool, because we're trying to figure out how much the specific item that the player has equipped is affecting their food stat, and then we also want to pass through food as the type as well. So why don't we quickly test out this function to see if it actually works. Let's go inside of the tool manager, and then we'll require that module script. So server script service, then local stats equals require server script service dot utils dot stats. So there we go, we now have that. And then let's say every single time we increase the player's food value, let's just also call the stats dot food as well and pass through the player. And then let's just print this out as well so that we can see the actual amount that we get. Now that we're printing it out, we also want to make sure that we don't forget to do the math. So currently the only thing affecting the stat is the item right now. So we of course need to add that to the total. So we're going to say total plus equals item. And you guys probably know this by now, but plus equals pretty much just means total plus item. It's just a simpler way of writing it. So now we can go ahead and start the game. Pull out the tool, click, and we can now see 3 has been printed out. And let's verify that that is correct. So we currently have French fry 3 equipped, and that should give us plus 3 food. So that's working perfectly. Awesome. So now that we have a general understanding of how we're finding the food stat value, we should make a new function to return the multiplier for the specific stat. So what I mean by that is when I displayed all the systems that affect the stats on screen, they had either an addition or a multiplication symbol next to their name. And the reason for that is because certain systems are going to be an additive value while others are multiplicative. So if you think about the food stat, the items and the pet system are additives to the food stat, while the rank, store, and boost systems are actually multiplicative. So what we want to do is we want to make a new function above the current food function, and we're going to call that food multiplier. And that's, of course, going to just accept the player again. And we're pretty much going to set this up the same way. So we're going to say total equals 0. And then we are going to return the total. So if we think back to what systems affect the food multiplier, we have the rank system. So we're going to say local rank get item stat. We'll pass through the equipped rank this time. So instead of tool, equipped rank. And then we'll also pass through rank as well. And then, of course, we want to do math with that. So we're going to say total plus equals rank. That'll add the rank to the multiplier. And now we figured out the multiplier. So what we can do to just verify that this is working as it should be, let's go back inside of the tool manager and we can test this out. So this time call the food multiplier function, start it up, and let's see what it prints out. So we equip our French fry, click, and we can see 1 has been printed out. And if you guys are confused by all the different numbers, on line 17, that is the food multiplier, and on line 16, that is just the food stat. So that's good to know that 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 is working perfectly fine. Now, one thing that I want to make note of that could possibly be different if your system is different than ours is the multiplier should probably never actually be 0. Because of course, if you guys multiply the food by the multiplier, which is equal to 0, then the food would also equal 0 as well. But considering how our rank system is set up, even by default, when the player first joins the game, their multiplier will at least be 1. It will never be 0. So if your system is different than ours, and you might run into this complication of multiplying by 0, what I would recommend doing is that instead of returning total, you would say if total is greater than 0, then return total, otherwise return 1. So at least then you're always returning something greater than 1. But of course, I'm going to revert that change, and we're going to go back to just returning total because of how our system works. Now, considering we don't have any of the other systems implemented into our game which affect the food stat, such as pets, the store, or boosters, we obviously can't add any of those systems to incorporate for this. But let me show you a small example of how we would also add those values into this as well. So let's say, for example, pets. We would create a variable called pet, and we would probably set the value of that to a module script named pets, and that module script will have a function called get stat, and then we would probably pass through the stat that we want to get, so food, and then that will return a number of the food stat that all the pets have combined. We would add the pet system to the total, just like how we add the item system to the total as well, and that's how we would calculate the stat. But of course, since we don't have the pet stat yet, we obviously can't do that. This is just an example of how that would work. And then of course, inside of the food multiplier, if we wanted to add boost to this, we would just say boosts equals, and then there would probably be a module script for handling the boost system, get stat, and then we provide it the food stat, and then of course we would add the boost to the total as well, similarly to how we did pets down below. So those are just examples of how you would incorporate more systems into modifying the stats value, and of course we'll be adding those later in the series once we actually create those systems as well. Now that we have the food multiplier and the food stat calculation done, we can move on to another stat. So let's create a new function called stats.maxFood, and of course it's going to return the max food stat. So what is the max food stat affected by? Well, once again, it is affected by the item that a player currently has equipped, and that would be the DNA. So instead of looking at the tool, we're going to look at the equipped DNA, and we're going to pass through DNA as the type as well, and that'll get us the player's max food stat. Now, max food is also affected by an item that the player can purchase from the store for Robux. If the player purchases the item from the store for Robux, they actually get unlimited max food. So we'll of course incorporate that system into this later when we do make the store system. Now I'm going to go ahead, copy and paste this again, and now we'll create the coin stat. Now the coin stat is affected by the pets the player has equipped, an item they can purchase from the store, and the boost system. Now we can remove the item variable from here and also delete the equation right there. And now since we don't have any of the systems which by default will give the player 1 coin stat, we want to set the total by default to 1. And now usually when we use the coin stat, we're going to be multiplying a specific number by the coin stat. And of course, if we multiply that number by 0, then that's going to give the player 0 coins, and we don't want that to happen. Additionally, we can make another stat. Let's go ahead and copy and paste the coin stat, and we're going to name that coin multiplier, and the total is going to be set to 0. And then we are going to want to get the rank. So we can copy the rank from the food multiplier and put the rank directly into the coin multiplier. We can add the rank to the total, and there we go. We now have the coin multiplier. Now, if you're confused as to why I'm using the rank in the coin multiplier when I didn't mention it before, I just went back and tested on Eating Simulator, and it seemed like they have a very odd equation which doesn't exactly make sense. I couldn't find a definitive answer about it, but it seems like their coin multiplier is affected by the player's rank. Of course, this series is to teach you guys how to make your own simulator, so it's not like you'll have to worry about silly things that Eating Simulator does, but I'm just trying to clarify why I'm now adding rank to this when I previously didn't mention it. So since the coin multiplier is affected by the rank, we now have the coin multiplier stat, and the coin stat by default is just 1, and that's all good to go. And now the last stat that we're going to add, which we have currently, is going to be called the general stat, and of course that's going to accept the player. Now we might rename this to something better in the future, but general is the only decent name that I could think of so far. The stat that I'm referring to with general is the stat which is affected by the rank system. I guess realistically, instead of calling that the general stat, we could even just call it the rank stat. That might be a little bit better. And this stat's relatively simple. We just have to return the direct value that we're getting from the get item function when we pass through the rank information. So what this stat is going to affect is things like the player's health, the player's speed, the player's damage, the food multiplier, the coin multiplier, which instead of doing the get item stat, we could actually now just call the stat rank player, and that'll also get us the same value. And I guess that would be good, so we're not repeating code unnecessarily. So with all that being said, we're pretty much finished all of the stats module, at least for now, until we add more of the other systems like the pet system, the Robux store system, and other things like that. So we can now move on to creating the reward module. So before we create the reward module, let's think of a few common rewards given in our simulator and what systems give them. So for instance, we have food food as a reward, and the system that gives this reward is by clicking. It's the main system that we have in our game. We then have the coins currency, which is given from selling food, daily logins, and also the Robux store. And then another reward that we have are pets, and these can be obtained from hatching eggs, trading with other players, and then also the Robux store as well. Now you might also be thinking that we do have a shop GUI, and those items from the shop GUI, such as the food, DNA, and ranks, would also be rewards that could fall into this system, which is true. But considering the items purchased from our shop are only obtained from the shop system, besides one DNA item, which is the infinite food, and that's purchased for Robux, it might actually be unnecessary to move all of that functionality into this specific module, because the main point of a module is for reusability. The advantage, though, of including the shop items in the reward module is that we're keeping all reward systems in one specific script. For now, though, I'm going to choose to not include the shop items in a reward module, but this could change in the future. Anyways, with all that being said, let's go ahead and actually create our food reward method. Inside of the rewards module, let's go ahead and create a new function called rewards.food. And now let's think. Food is rewarded each time a player clicks while holding a food item. Based off this, our method should accept the player and the amount of food that we want to give to the player. So our first argument is of course going to be the player, which is a player. And the second argument is going to be the amount of food that we want to give to the player, and that's going to be a number. Now we usually have to really plan out how we're actually going to give the player food directly, but we've already done this inside of our tool manager, which is inside of the server script service. So right here inside of the function, which is connected to the tool activated event, we adjust the player's food value right here. So player leader stats.food.value, and then we set that to itself plus the tool stat. And this actually doesn't take into account for the multiplier, which we just calculated inside of our stats, but really the important information that we want is directly from right here. So we're going to go ahead and copy this player.leaderstats.food.value, and we'll go ahead and paste it inside of our food method. And then we want to set that to plus equals amount, so we add the amount to the current food value. Now we could just simply call this method right now and it would work. If for instance we called this method from the tool manager rather than giving the player the food this way, it would actually reward the player food. But we're also completely forgetting about the multiplier stat. And remember, inside of our stats module, we already created the food multiplier method, which will calculate the multiplier for us. And we want to add that multiplier inside of this method right here. So let's go ahead and initialize the stats module inside of here. So we want to get the server script service. And then of course we want to get the stats module, which is inside of the server script service.utils.stats. And there we go. So let's go ahead and create a variable inside of here called multiplier. And then we're going to set that to stats.foodMultiplier, and we'll pass through the player. And now we can get the food multiplier. And of course, we want to use this multiplier rather than just adding the amount. We want to multiply the amount by the multiplier and then add that to the player's current food. So now this is a pretty perfect method, but let's expand on it a little bit. What if we didn't want to use the multiplier? For example, let's say that we have a daily reward which will give the player food, but we want to only give them that specific amount of food and not have the amount affected by the multiplier. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually accept another argument in this method. That's going to be called useMultiplier, and it's actually going to be a boolean. By default, we're going to set the useMultiplier to true. So we're going to say useMultiplier equals if useMultiplier does not equal nil, then useMultiplier. Otherwise, it's going to be set to true by default. And now, when we're setting the multiplier, what we want to do is if use multiplier is true, then we want to set that to the food multiplier. Otherwise, we want to set it to 1 so it doesn't actually affect the amount. And of course, the way that we can do this is by saying if use multiplier equals true, then stats.foodMultiplier, else 1. So now if we do want to use the multiplier, then we will use the multiplier. Otherwise, the multiplier will be set to 1. And of course, any amount times 1 will equal 1, of course, besides 0, but that's besides the point. Let's now test this method out. Let's add a print statement inside of here. And just to make sure that everything's working correctly, we're going to accept the amount, the multiplier, and the amount times multiplier so that we can see the direct amount, the direct multiplier, and then the amount times multiplier, which is going to the player. And now we want to call this method inside of the tool manager, which is already handling when the player clicks and then to reward the player some money. Now, if we look inside of how we're currently rewarding the player money, we're actually doing a lot of work that we've already covered inside of the stats module. So what this means is we could actually literally delete all of this. And now instead of using all of that, what we can do is, well, first we want to add the rewards module into the script. So let's go ahead and get the rewards module. There we go. And now what we're going to say is rewards.food pass through the player. And then for the amount, we're going to say stats.food and of course pass through the player. And now we could pass through true, although we don't have to because remember by default use multiplier is true. So realistically, all we have to do is call this method, pass through the player, and then pass through the amount of food that we want to give to that player. And to get the the food amount, we just have to call the stats method right here, and now we're all good to go. So let's go ahead and save that and start up our game and see if that works correctly. So hold out our tool, go ahead and click, and we can see in the console is printed out 3, which is the multiplier, and 9, which is the total amount given to the player. And if we look at our food, we can see I currently have 4,131 food, and then if we click, we now have 4,140, so just checking everything's working correctly, and it does. Let's also go inside of our shop. Rather than having French fry 3 equipped, let's equip number 1. Now let's go ahead and click while holding French fry 1, and we can see the amount given is 1, the multiplier is 3, so the amount times the multiplier is also 3 as well, and that means we're getting 3 coins. And the reason our multiplier is 3 is because we have the 3rd rank equipped right now. If we wanted to, we could equip the 1st rank, and now we should see 1, 1, 1, and that's exactly what we see. So this is all working perfectly. Stats are being calculated exactly how they should be, and the food is given to the player with the exact total that it should be as well. So going back inside of a rewards module, we can go ahead and delete this print statement, and this method is pretty perfect. In the future, we might expand on it, and we could even create a new remote event which we use to notify the player every single time that they've been given food, and then we can make a screen GUI pop up which will be used as a notification to display to the player that they have earned food. But for right now, this is perfectly fine, and this could be easily expanded in the future. What we now want to do is we're going to go ahead and copy this and now create a method for rewarding coins to the player. So we're going to go ahead, copy that, paste it, and rename this method from food to coins. Although currently we actually don't have a system set up for selling food to earn coins, although that will come in future episodes. Realistically, the only changes that we need to make to this method currently is change the multiplier, or where the multiplier comes from. So rather than the food multiplier, we're of course going to use the coin multiplier, and then change the directory where the rewards go to. So rather than food, they'll be going to coins. And now, similar to calling the food method, we could also call the coins method anywhere we want to reward the player coins, rename this to coins, and of course just pass through the player, and then rather than passing through the food stat, we would pass through the coin stat, and now we would be rewarding the player the specific amount of coins that they should be receiving. Although of course, since the player shouldn't earn coins along with earning food, I'm going to remove this. I was just showing you guys how you could call that method. Now originally when we first discussed the rewards module, I did mention that pets are a system that could fall into this module. The thing is though, is that it's really hard for me to even show you guys an example of what the pet method would look like, just because it's drastically different from food and coins, which is a currency. Without the pet system actually being set up right now, it would be really hard for me to make a demonstration understandable for you guys as to why we need the specific things that we need. So that's why I'm not going to even try to get into showing you guys what the pet reward method would look like. We'll do that in the future when we create the actual pet system. But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to be it for this episode. Hopefully you guys did enjoy. As always, if you guys did, make sure you smash the like button, also hit the subscribe button, and turn those post notifications on if you want to get notified when I upload more Roblox development content. Additionally, I do have a Patreon if you guys like to support me and gain access to all the scripts and the game file that I made during this episode. There's a link down below in the description. You guys go check it out. With that being said, I hope that you guys have a great day, and I'll see you guys in the next episode.